When someone pulls away, when they go silent or disappear from your life, the immediate instinct for many people is to chase, to reach out, to fix, to explain, to ask questions, to somehow mend the fracture in the connection because the discomfort of being left feels too unbearable to sit with. It feels like if we don't do something, say something, they might forget about us, move on, or never look back. And so we begin the exhausting cycle of trying to get them to see what they're missing. But here's the thing, the more you chase, the more you lose your leverage. The more you try to prove your worth, the more you undermine it. What creates attraction isn't pursuit, it's presence, it's certainty, it's grounded confidence in who you are, not desperation for someone else to validate it. The very act of chasing someone is a subconscious declaration that they are more valuable than you, that their absence has the power to disrupt your peace, that their attention is something you need in order to feel whole, that no relationship, not even the most passionate, intoxicating love story, should be built on the foundation of dependency, because the second your happiness is tied to someone else's actions, you're no longer in control of your own life. When you stop chasing, you do something far more powerful. You signal to the world and to them that your life doesn't collapse in their absence, that you don't need them. You may want them, but there's a huge difference. Need creates pressure. Want creates curiosity. Need repels because it feels like weight. Want attracts because it leaves room, and people are drawn to those who leave space. Space for mystery, space for self-respect, space for the other person to come to their own conclusions instead of being forced into one. It's easy to believe that if you don't try to make someone stay, they'll forget you. But what actually happens is the opposite. When someone sees that you're not chasing, not fighting for them, not begging for answers, that you've gone quiet and turned inward, they start to feel something unfamiliar, the consequence of their absence. And that consequence becomes the thing that makes them stop and think, not because you punished them, not because you manipulated them, but because you simply removed your energy. Your energy is your currency. It's what makes you memorable, desirable, magnetic. When you give it freely to someone who has withdrawn theirs, you strip it of its power. But when you contain it, when you conserve your emotional investment and choose instead to redirect that energy back to yourself, you begin to radiate a different kind of presence. One that doesn't scream, "Pick me," but quietly says, "I'll be more than fine either way." And this is where real transformation happens, because when you no longer seek validation from someone who isn't offering it, you're forced to confront where your sense of value really comes from. You begin asking deeper questions. Who am I without them? What do I actually bring to the table? What would it look like to live a life that excites me regardless of who's sitting beside me? These questions are uncomfortable at first, but they're necessary. They pull you out of the emotional haze and into clarity, into growth, into ownership of your identity. People often think self-worth is about affirmations and positive thinking, but it's so much deeper than that. Self-worth is an energy. It's in how you speak, how you walk into a room, how you carry yourself when no one's watching. It's in the decisions you make, what you tolerate, what you walk away from, what you wait for, and what you create. When you start treating yourself like someone of value, other people begin to adjust their behavior accordingly. And if they don't, it no longer matters, because you're no longer in the business of convincing anyone to see what you already know. The shift from chasing to self-anchoring is subtle, but life-changing. Instead of saying, "What can I do to make them see?" you begin to ask, "How can I be more of myself regardless of who's watching?" That question is where your power lives. Because when you embody your value rather than advertise it, it speaks louder than any words ever could. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you suppress your emotions or pretend not to feel. It simply means you allow space for someone to come to you on their own terms, while you continue living your life on yours. You stop chasing because you realize that anyone who requires chasing was never aligned with your worth to begin with. And the people who are truly meant for you will be drawn in not by your pursuit, but by your presence, by the calm in your energy, by the peace in your silence, by the undeniable magnetism of someone who knows what they bring to the table and doesn't need to prove it. You stop proving. You stop pleasing. You stop performing. And in that stillness, in that rooted, grounded place where your value no longer fluctuates based on who stays or who leaves, you become unshakable, the kind of person people come back to, not because you begged them to, but because they realize that what you offer can't be found anywhere else. There's something profoundly powerful about silence. Not the kind that's used to punish or manipulate, but the kind that comes from true emotional discipline, the kind that says, I respect myself too much to argue for a place in your life. Most people don't understand the strength of silence, and that's why they panic when someone pulls away. They fill the space with messages, with explanations, with apologies for things that didn't even require one. They think silence means weakness, when in fact, it's often the strongest, most dignified move you can make. When someone walks away, they expect you to follow, not always consciously, but somewhere deep down, they anticipate that your response will validate their importance, that you'll reach out, ask what went wrong, try to reattach the bond they just severed. They expect this because it's what most people do, but when you don't, when you go still, when you don't fight for a conversation they aren't willing to have, when you hold your ground and say nothing, silence becomes deafening. It echoes in ways words never could. People can ignore a message, they can deflect a question, they can respond to emotion with logic or distance, but they can't unfeel the void that your silence creates. They can't rationalize it away because it's not about what you did, it's about what you didn't do. And that gap, that missing energy becomes a mirror they have to face. It forces them to wonder why you didn't chase, why you didn't try, why you chose to sit with your dignity rather than reach for something that let you go. The mistake most people make is assuming that communication always equals connection, that by talking, by reaching out, by trying to understand, they're being mature or emotionally intelligent. But maturity isn't about constantly explaining yourself to people who already made the choice to misunderstand you. It's about knowing when your words won't be heard, and choosing instead to conserve your emotional energy, because not every space deserves your voice. Not every person is ready to receive your truth, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's intentional, it's rooted in self-respect, in awareness of what you deserve. It's the decision to let someone feel the consequences of stepping away from your life without the comfort of your attention. When you stop showing up in someone's inbox, when you stop being a presence they can rely on to boost their ego or soothe their doubt, it changes the dynamic completely. Suddenly, they're no longer in control of the story. Your absence becomes a question mark they weren't expecting, and that curiosity, why haven't they reached out, starts to grow. What most people don't realize is that silence creates contrast. When someone has gotten used to your presence, your checking in, your emotional investment, your loyalty, they begin to take it for granted. It becomes background noise, predictable, accessible. But when you go quiet, it interrupts the pattern. It forces them to feel the shift. And in that shift, they start to reflect. Not always immediately, not always consciously, but it happens. They begin to realize what they were experiencing wasn't just comfort, it was connection. And now that it's gone, they're forced to evaluate its value. But this only works when your silence is real, when it's not a strategy or a performance, but a genuine decision to detach. You can't use silence as a trick to get someone to come back. It has to come from a place of peace, not punishment. People can feel the difference. They can sense when your stillness is rooted in confidence versus when it's a desperate attempt to get noticed. If your silence is really just a louder form of pleading, it loses all of its power. True silence means you've let go of the need to be chosen. It means you're not sitting in a dark room, staring at your phone, hoping they'll come to their senses. It means you're getting on with your life, not pretending to. And that's when they feel it. That's when the uncertainty sets. Because your silence suggests something more dangerous than anger or sadness. It suggests you might actually be okay, you might be healing, you might be moving on, you might no longer be waiting. And for someone who assumed they could come back whenever they pleased, that realization hits hard. Because now you're not just a memory, they're wondering if someone else is getting the version of you they didn't appreciate. You see, people expect noise, they expect closure, They expect the long message that explains everything, but sometimes they don't deserve that closure. Sometimes the best closure you can give is living your life without needing them to understand why. Your silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care more about your peace than you do about managing someone else's emotion. And let's be clear, silence isn't about disappearing from the world. It's about removing yourself from their world. It's about continuing your life with grace and power, just not in their direction. You still show up for your dreams. You still engage with your people. You still grow. You just don't hand over your attention to someone who couldn't value it when they had it. Eventually they start to feel it, the absence, the uncertainty, the missing energy they thought would always be there. And in that space they begin to realize the impact you had. Not because you shouted it, not because you forced them to see it, but because you gave them no other choice but to feel it. And that is where silence becomes your loudest answer. The biggest mistake people make after a breakup, a ghosting, or a slow fade is believing that their life needs to pause until that person returns. They wait, they hope, they replay old conversations, stalk social media, analyze mixed signals, and all the while, life continues to pass them by. What they don't realize is that the only way to actually create the possibility of someone returning is to start living like they're not coming back. Not as a game, not as a reverse psychology tactic, but as a deep commitment to themselves. Because when you truly start living for you, when your life becomes full, rich, vibrant, and purposeful, you stop being someone who's waiting, and you become someone worth missing. There is an energy that radiates from a person who is focused on building their world. It's the energy of someone who walks into a room and doesn't need attention to feel seen, someone who chooses joy without needing permission, someone who doesn't sit around wondering when their phone will buzz, but instead fills their days with things that make them feel alive. That energy is attractive, not because it's loud or flashy, but because it's self-sustaining. People gravitate toward individuals who clearly don't need them to feel whole. It's not arrogance, it's alignment, it's knowing that your life matters, whether someone comes back into it or not. When you start living a life that excites you, everything shifts. You stop checking your phone obsessively, you stop trying to create posts that might make them notice you, you stop curating your existence around their possible return, and instead you start investing in things that bring you closer to the person you want to become. You say yes to the trip, you sign up for that class, you spend time with people who see you, who challenge you,
and the magic
who remind
is,
you that your worth
the more
was
you
never
do this
tied to
authentically,
someone else's
the
affection.
more you start to feel different. You stop being haunted by the question, why did they leave? And you start asking, why was I waiting? Because each step forward, each new moment that belongs only to you, pulls you further out of their orbit. And yet, paradoxically, this is what often pulls them back. Not because you wanted them to come back, but because you stop needing them to. People notice when your energy changes. They might not be able to articulate it, but they feel it. They feel when you're no longer emotionally available in the same way. They feel the shift in your focus, the absence of your attention, the fact that you're not lingering in their shadow anymore. And it's unsettling to them. Not because they suddenly realized how much they love you, but because they've lost the comfort of knowing you were always there. You weren't supposed to thrive without them. You weren't supposed to smile genuinely, laugh fully, flirt freely. You weren't supposed to move on, not really. And when they see that you have, or even that you might, that's when the internal discomfort begins. That's when they start wondering, did I make a mistake? Are they slipping away for good? That's when curiosity turns into reflection. Because the world doesn't hand out many people who genuinely evolve, who grow through heartbreak instead of getting stuck in it. And if you become that kind of person, someone who doesn't just recover, but rebirths themselves, you'll stand out without even trying. But this can't be a performance. You can't live a better life just to lure someone back. Because if you're doing it for them, it's still about them, and they'll feel that. You're not truly free if every move you make is a calculated attempt to prove something to someone else. You're still imprisoned by their opinion, still chained to their validation. Real freedom comes when your growth becomes personal, when your journey forward is no longer about who might be watching, but about who you're becoming. This is why it's crucial to surround yourself with the right environment, the right people, the right inputs, not distractions, but alignments, moments and relationships that add to you, that remind you of what you bring to the table, not because someone else left, but because you're finally sitting at your own table and realizing how much space you've been giving to people who didn't deserve it. And here's the quiet truth. When you start showing up for yourself consistently, when your life becomes bigger than any one relationship, when you look in the mirror and see someone evolving, not just surviving, something clicks. You don't just become someone they might miss. You become someone you don't want to lose again. That's the real transformation. That's where the power lives. Because even if they do come back, you're no longer standing in the same place. You're not frozen in the version of yourself who was waiting, hoping, needing. You've grown. You've experienced new things. You've tapped into parts of yourself that maybe even you had forgotten about. And if they want to re-enter your life, they'll have to meet this version of you. The one who stopped waiting, stopped chasing, and started creating something bigger than them. The focus should never be on what you can do to get someone back. That's a reactive life. That's a powerless life. The question is, what can you do to become so fully yourself that whether they come back or not, you're already winning? When you answer that question with action, not thoughts, not posts, not speculation, but real action, you take your power back, and whether they come back becomes irrelevant, because the life you've built in their absence is already more fulfilling than the relationship you were once begging for. There comes a moment in every emotionally painful experience, especially when someone walks away, where you're faced with a choice. You can obsess over the loss, or you can choose to obsess over your evolution. One of those paths leads to stagnation, the other to transformation, but it requires honesty. It requires taking all that energy you've been pouring into wondering where they went, what they're doing, who they might be talking to, and redirecting it inward. That's not easy, it's not instant, but it's the only move that puts the power back in your hand. The mistake we often make is assuming that the story is over just because someone exited the scene. We tell ourselves it meant we weren't enough, or we did something wrong, or if we had just acted differently, they'd still be here. But growth doesn't happen by twisting yourself into knots, trying to figure out someone else's decisions. Growth happens when you shift the spotlight, not onto them, but onto yourself, because their exit, that's not your cue to pause, that's your cue to evolve. It's so easy to stay stuck in a waiting room, emotionally on pause, life on hold, because you're hoping they'll come back. But in that holding pattern, you're robbing yourself of the most precious thing you have: time. Time you could be using to become stronger, wiser, more alive. Time you could be investing in your own self-awareness, your passion, your purpose. The more you evolve, the less your mind stays stuck on whether they'll return. Because when you begin to understand what you truly need, what you genuinely desire in a partner, what actually lights you up, you might realize they never really gave you that to begin with. This process isn't about revenge. It's not about becoming so incredible that they crawl back and beg for a second chance. That's still a story about them. This is about making your healing your mission, about deciding, even if they never reach out again, I'm still going to become the version of myself I've always wanted to be. Because evolution is personal, it's sacred, and most importantly, it's independent. When you stop waiting and start evolving, you stop trying to make sense of their silence and start making sense of your own patterns. You ask better questions. What have I tolerated in the past that I don't want to tolerate anymore? What parts of myself did I silence to make someone else more comfortable? What needs did I ignore just to keep someone around? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the seeds of transformation. The moment you start reflecting like this, you move from being a victim of someone else's departure to being the architect of your own becoming. And what's beautiful is that this evolution creates clarity. You stop fantasizing about the person you lost and start seeing them clearly. You remember the inconsistencies, the emotional unavailability, the parts of you that had to shrink just to keep things from falling apart. When you're evolving, nostalgia doesn't cloud your vision the same way, because you're building new reference points, new memory, new evidence that life without them can be beautiful too, maybe even more beautiful than it ever was with them. When you commit to your evolution, you also start to attract different things, better people, healthier opportunities, deeper conversation, not because the world changed, but because you did. Your standards rise, your intuition sharpens, your tolerance for breadcrumbs or confusion drops to zero, and from that place, even if they do come back, you'll meet them from a completely different posture, not from a place of longing or lack, but from a place of discernment. You'll be able to ask not emotionally but logically, does this still serve me? That question alone is a sign of your growth. Because the truth is, people return all the time. They circle back when they feel your absence, when they sense your energy has shifted, when they realize what they lost. But what matters is not whether they come back. It's who you've become by the time they do. If your evolution has been real, you might not even want what you once cried for. You might see them with new eyes and realize you were building a future with someone who had no vision, no depth, no capacity to meet you where you now stand. So instead of asking whether they'll reach out or how to get them to miss you, ask how you can evolve past needing that question answered. Focus on who you want to be, how you want to live, and what kind of love you actually desire. Because when your life starts to reflect those things, you'll stop wondering if they'll return, and start realizing that the right people never require you to wait, to shrink, or to beg. They'll meet you where you are because that's where they live too. And if you never become that version of yourself, you'll never even know what that kind of relationship could feel like. So stop watching the door and start building the path that leads you to the next chapter of your story. Most people believe they have to prove something to be chosen. They think if they just look a certain way, say the right thing, stay available, stay accommodating, maybe just maybe the person who left will turn around and finally see them. But here's the deeper truth that changes everything. People don't come back for what's always been there. They come back for what they realize they can't replace. And that realization only happens when you stop being accessible in the same way. When you evolve into someone so self-respecting, so elevated, so emotionally refined, they feel the absence of something truly rare. That's the moment they realize they didn't just leave a person. They left an experience, an energy, a presence that didn't scream for attention but made them feel something they didn't even know they were missing. But you don't become that kind of person by waiting. You don't become irreplaceable by standing still. You become it by growing into yourself in such a powerful way that whether they come back or not, you know they won't find your essence anywhere else. Most people are easy to replace. They live on autopilot. They're reactive. They shrink when someone pulls away. They become emotionally available even when the other person is not. They abandon themselves to hold on to someone else. That kind of behavior might win someone for a moment, but it never keeps them. Because people are drawn to individuals who are anchored, people who don't lose their identity when someone walks out, people who keep building, keep rising, keep becoming, regardless of who is watching. You become irreplaceable when your sense of self becomes non-negotiable, when your energy feels like home, not because it's comfortable but because it's true, when you don't chase, don't beg, don't argue for your worth. You stop asking what do I need to do to win them back, and start asking what do I need to do to never lose myself again. That shift makes all the difference, because it's not just about moving on, it's about rising above. Think about the people in your life who left an impression, not because they were perfect or always available or did everything right, but because they had something about them that felt different, a presence that couldn't be faked, a stillness that didn't need constant reassurance. That's what you need to cultivate in yourself, and you do that by becoming emotionally independent, by not outsourcing your self-esteem to the person you once loved, by becoming someone you respect even in solitude. When someone leaves and you stay grounded, you're sending a message they can feel, even from a distance, that you're not shaken, that you're not going to shrink into desperation, that your self-worth doesn't live in their hands. And here's what happens over time. They start to remember. They remember the way you made them feel, the way you listened, the way you showed up, the way your presence carried a different kind of peace. And now that you're not there, they feel the space where you used to be, not because you chased them, but because you didn't. But this can only happen if you stop performing and start becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to be chosen to feel valuable, the kind of person who doesn't mold themselves to fit into someone else's life, but instead builds a life so full, so expansive, so aligned, that only the right people will have the capacity to walk into it. And if they do come back, they'll return to something different, a version of you that doesn't apologize for your boundaries, that doesn't sacrifice your emotional needs, that no longer mistakes temporary connection for long-term compatibility. They'll return to someone who no longer lives in reaction to their choices, but in devotion to your own. And in that moment you'll have the most important decision to make. Not whether you're still wanted, but whether you still want them. That's the real power. Not in luring someone back, but in elevating to a point where the old version of them no longer fits into the new version of you. And if they want to stay, they'll have to rise too, because the version of you that waited, begged, doubted, that person no longer exists. You didn't just heal, you outgrew the story entirely. The truth is, people come back for what feels rare, what feels real, what feels evolved. They come back when they realize they can't replicate what you brought to their life. And that realization only happens when you stop proving, stop pleasing, stop performing, and start becoming the version of you who never needed them to feel whole. The version of you who finally understood that the most irreplaceable thing in the world is someone who never had to be chased to be powerful. What you've just heard isn't about tricks or strategies to make someone come back. It's about transforming yourself so deeply that whether they return or not becomes irrelevant. It's about releasing the need to chase, explain, or prove, and stepping fully into your own power. You stop waiting for their validation and start living with intention. You grow, you evolve, you become the kind of person who is no longer shaken by someone's absence, because your life is built on something far more stable: self-respect, purpose, and inner peace. And in doing so, you don't just become someone they remember, you become someone they can never replace.